Okay, I think we're ready to make a start. Everybody's very welcome, and I can see there's a big attendance again at this meeting, and there's been a very good attendance and very global attendance all day at these meetings. For those who've just joined us, you're very welcome to this International Socialist Tendency Conference on the Revolutionary Alternative to Capitalism, and it's organised by the International Socialist Tendency. My name is Breed Smith. I'm coming to you from Dublin. I'm a member of the Socialist Workers Network and a TD in the Irish Parliament for People Before Profit. So this session, which we have very good speakers for, we have Michelle Robidoux, we have John Molyneux and Alex Klinikos. I'll introduce them, say a bit about them as each of them are coming into the meeting. And just to say to you all, I'll say it now and I'll say it again towards the end. If you do want to speak, please raise your hand using the electronic hand and raise your hand early. Each speaker will have 10 minutes. I'll give them notice with a minute to go to wind up, and then we will have plenty of time for discussion and take in as many speakers as possible before we finish up at 6:30. So this is going to be a very interesting and very important meeting, given the challenge that we face both in our own countries and where we live, but also globally, and how we join the dots in the struggle. And I want to introduce our first speaker, which is Michelle Robidoux, and she is a Toronto-based activist, a member of International Socialists, and co-author with Brian Champ of Fighting Back on Turtle Island, Indigenous Sovereignty, the Working Class and Anti-Capitalism. You're very welcome, Michelle, so I'll hand it over to you. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Breed, and thanks, comrades, for this wonderful conference. I'm speaking to you today from the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, and now the Mississauga of the Credit, from the city known as Toronto. I want to start with talking about XR's response to the COP26 summit. They said it failed to deliver the necessary action to keep temperatures below 1.5 degrees, with pledges from nations still taking the world to 2.4 degrees of warming. World leaders are making an active choice to take us over the cliff edge. And I think it's important to, as we have been in this conference so far, to take in what this realization means for hundreds of thousands of climate justice activists around the world. Our rulers have decided to sacrifice the planet. The climate justice movement, which in September 2019 built massive climate strikes in countries around the world, was set back by COVID, as many movements were, and is just now reemerging. And the world's leaders have shown their allegiances to oil and gas, to capitalism, and not to planet and people. Of course, they've done this primarily by lying about their real intentions. Net zero is a key example of this. Instead of focusing on real reductions in carbon emissions, mandating and supervising the phase out of fossil fuel production, reducing overall energy use, and ramping up zero carbon emissions energy production, they claim they can reach net zero by 2050 through expanding existing market-based mechanisms like the carbon tax, carbon offsets, emissions trading. As one COP26 attendee put it, net zero is total bullshit because there is no more space in the carbon budget for the rich world to continue to pump greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And of course, one of the slickest liars of the lot is Canada's Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau. Not only has Canada not met a single target for reducing greenhouse gases, it's one of 2 G7 nations that have actually increased greenhouse gas emissions since signing the Paris Agreement in 2016. Canada's had a 3.3% increase in greenhouse gases, and the US 0.6% increase. And the Trudeau government has continued to invest billions in oil and gas infrastructure, $12 billion most recently to purchase the Trans Mountain Tar Sands pipeline, and of course is subsidizing a whole range of other projects, including the liquid natural gas pipeline known as CGL pipeline. But Trudeau says this new oil and gas infrastructure, which by the way runs through unceded Indigenous land, is what will fund Canada's energy transition away from fossil fuels. He said emissions that are going to be conquered by technologies that are either unproven or don't even exist yet. And essentially, we're supposed to believe that Canada will meet its climate change targets while continuing to increase oil and gas production. So the claims made by the Canadian government at the COP26 are really despicable lies. And I know they're in good company with other lying liars. But Trudeau, interestingly, got a lot of airtime, at least here in this part of the world. Hopefully he didn't get airtime in other parts of the world, for mentioning the town of Lytton, British Columbia, that was incinerated in this summer's forest fires, the unprecedented forest fires that took place that killed almost 600 people from the heat and pollution and so on. And so him mentioning Lytton, BC, was supposed to be an illustration of his concern why we need bolder measures. And he wanted to bolster his image as being unsatisfied with current targets. But it was really only to give that veneer of credibility. He acknowledges that climate change is having horrific consequences, such as incinerating a whole city, and then wraps it up with the fantasy of attaining net zero while funding and enforcing with police an increase in oil and gas production. And just by the way, to top it off, he's just named a former Greenpeace director as his new Minister of Environment and Climate Change. So we need to expose the lies our rulers are peddling and the real consequences of their decisions. But the most important fact about COP26, as we've been discussing, is resistance in the street. And in August 2021, the Indigenous Environmental Network published a report that actually quantified the impact of Indigenous resistance to pipeline projects, natural gas projects, fracking. And it was mentioned in the earlier session, but it's equivalent to at least 1/4 of annual emissions on Turtle Island, the land currently known as North America. And that includes the ongoing fight against the Trans Mountain Pipeline, the Coastal GasLink Pipeline, which Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs have been resisting, which sparked the Shut Down Canada movement in February 2020. This movement captured the imagination of thousands who are looking for a strategy in the face of an accelerating climate crisis. The dynamic of Indigenous resistance to encroachments on their sovereignty and mass solidarity by non-Indigenous people, including organized workers, led to railways, ports, the legislature being shut down in British Columbia. It was mentioned earlier, the role of longshore workers and dockers. And in this case, again, dockers refused to cross a picket line set up by Indigenous land defenders and their supporters. And after 2 weeks into the shutdown, $425 million in goods were being stranded every day. That's the potential power of these movements connecting. The Shutdown Canada movement has had a lasting impact on the political train. And I should say it's a testament to this Indigenous resistance that it is now common to preface colonial place names with so-called or currently called, and I think this is incredibly important. This movement shows the possibility of effective resistance to the government and industry's headlong rush to planetary suicide. But since the Shutdown Canada movement, the confirmation of 215 unmarked graves at the site of a former residential school for Indigenous children has shaken so-called Canada to its foundations, the foundation of land theft, of oppression and cruelty that is not a historic phenomenon, but a continuous and ongoing one. And the revelations of the extent of Canada's crimes against Indigenous peoples has mobilized thousands across the land. On Canada Day this year, which is July 1st, many tens of thousands marched in cities across the country to say there is no pride in genocide. The pressure on the government forced them to institute the first National Day of Truth and Reconciliation on September 30th. On that day, while hundreds of thousands took part in ceremonies and gatherings to honor the thousands of children who never returned from residential schools, and it's estimated it could be as many as 25,000 children died, Justin Trudeau chose to go surfing on a beach in British Columbia. You couldn't make this stuff up. And as Anishinaabe author Jesse Wente wrote in his recently published book, Unreconciled, Canada's very being is dependent on the assertion that Indigenous people are less than human. In other words, as long as we exist outside the confines of colonial history and history books and storytelling, we're a threat. And we're still here, still human beings, who signify that Canada is nothing more than a murderous resource extraction project. So that's, I know, I see I'm running out of time. I just want to say a couple of things about the importance of socialists organizing in this context that we're in post COP26. We had a rally November 6th in Toronto, and the threads of these developments around Shut Down Canada, around the revelations around the Indigenous children who literally were killed by colonialism. These threads were coming together. Indigenous activists, trade unionists, young people in Fridays for Future, others gathered to protest COP26. And to make a long story short, as a result of the intervention of organized socialists to build these connections, to strengthen the movement, to defend Indigenous land defenders, to fight climate change, and to make meaningful contributions, you had a situation where steelworkers were donating thousands of dollars to land defenders to go and stand up against Coastal GasLink. I think we all know the urgency of the situation, but socialist politics matter, socialist organization matters. And I hope that everyone on this call today can make that commitment to building socialist organization today. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michelle. That's so interesting. I'm sure you have loads more to say, and I'll just draw attention to your book again, the Fighting Back on Turtle Island, which you co-authored with Brian Shamp, so people should keep that in mind. Very, very interesting. Our next speaker is John Molyneux. John is the editor of the Irish Marxist Review, a member of the Socialist Workers Network and People Before Profit in Ireland. John is coordinator of the Global Eco-Socialist Network, GEN, and has written widely on Marxism and eco-socialism. So you have 10 minutes, John.
Thanks very much, Brady, and thanks for that brilliant contribution, Michelle. I suppose I should say that I'm speaking to you from the Republic of Ireland, once Britain's oldest colony and now a tax haven for the multinational corporations. Look, after the abject failure of COP, which, to be absolutely honest, the degree of the failure surprised even me, who was totally cynical about it. But after that, the movement is going to have to take stock of the situation, and there will be debates about strategy and tactics. And as revolutionary socialists, we have a lot to say in the movement about those strategy and tactics. I think, of course, there are going to be enormous differences between different countries. I was struck by Brian Shamp from Canada saying Fridays for Future is the most dynamic element in the movement, and that's wonderful to hear, but it's not true, unfortunately, where we are in Ireland. Other people are what, Fridays for Future has faded. But despite whatever differences there are, I think there are some general points that we can make. Most of these points have actually been made in the discussion, but my job is to kind of bring those together and emphasize the main points, I think. First, on the very fundamental question of can the system be pressurized into going green, into tackling the problem of climate change and solving the deep metabolic rift referred to between society and nature, I think we have to be clear, capitalism is not going to solve this problem. And I think the events of the last few weeks, and particularly what has happened at COP, has seen a shift in our direction in this argument. The atmosphere at recent demonstrations and so on was much more open to socialist argument, and that's an opportunity we have to seize. But the fact that the system isn't going to change doesn't mean we absent ourselves from or abstain from struggles to apply pressure to the system. Just as the fact that capitalism cannot be reformed ultimately, but needs a revolution, doesn't mean we don't fight for reforms. Of course we do. And we were right to mobilize over COP, and we will be right to mobilize similarly in the future. The failure of the system has to be demonstrated and proved in practice precisely to the millions of working people who are not yet, fully conscious of this fact. One factor in the situation that has come up a number of times and always comes up, this is the pressure of the time deadline that we all feel. The the notion that there is a definite limit on this in this whole process. I'm going to address this in two ways, but the first thing I want to say is that this creates a certain pressure to what I will call substitutionism in the movement, to the idea that the brave, self-sacrificing actions of a few individuals, perhaps through sabotage, is the way forward. This has already been signaled by Andreas Malm in his book How to Blow Up a Pipeline. It was previously evident in the thinking of Roger Hallam, the founder of Extinction Rebellion, and so on. And these sort of ideas will have a resonance, I think, in the movement, a kind of a tendency towards what will appear as ultra-radicalism. Now, I think we have to really not be in favor of this. I just noticed here, like a parallel, they're not terrorists, but a parallel with terrorism, the old phrase, Marxist phrase that the terrorist is a liberal with a bomb. Often this kind of extreme militant tactics by a few people can be based on the idea that if they do the extreme enough things, the system will be pressurized. And we have to say, no, what really is required is a revolution. And for a revolution, the best way to prepare for this is through a mass movement. Having said that, we do want militant action. We do solidarize with militant action. And I think the point made earlier in the discussion by Charlie Kimber of a danger of the fracturing of the movement between kind of moderate, peaceful demonstrations and a militant minority is something we want to avoid. We want a militant mass movement, and that will involve all sorts of varieties of tactics, blockades, and so on. Next point I think we have to make is that if we want a mass movement, and even more so if we want a revolution, we have to reach out to a whole variety of other struggles by the working class and the oppressed. And climate justice is an extremely important slogan for us here, which we can use. I think the COP coalition in Glasgow did us all a favor by calling for a day of action on climate justice, because I think we can involve all sorts of different layers in this. Just an example, what I'm talking about here, I think from the Global Eco-Socialist Network, when we drew up our founding principles, we included in this that the movement had to be, that the GEN, Global Eco-Socialist Network, was going to be anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-transphobic, opposed to all national oppression and so on, as a basic principle. Not only because that's right, but also because I don't think you can build a movement in the present circumstances that isn't anti-racist, anti-sexist, and so on. And I think we need to argue that in all trade unions, people's movements of various kinds, that they should be also for climate justice. And I think that's winnable in a huge number of situations. But within that movement, and within that general movement for climate justice, we do have to explicitly make the argument for revolution. And here the question of the time deadline we're facing comes up again, because there is often the argument that there's no time for that. There's no time for the socialist transformation of society. We haven't got time. We have to therefore work with what we've got, which is the capitalist state. Interestingly, that argument is put by Andreas Malm as well. And I just want to challenge the assumption here that actually trying to green capitalism is a quicker process than the process of trying to achieve revolutionary transformation. Not at all, I think. I think we've already watched them go through 30 or 40 years of dragging their feet. And if we wait for capitalism to go green, we'll wait forever. And precisely because of the urgency of the situation, we need a revolution. And here we should remember that once revolution breaks out, it can and does spread like wildfire. It's not actually then a very slow process. You know, you can go back to the October Revolution of 1917 and the revolutionary wave that followed it, or you can go back to the Arab Spring to see how fantastically fast it can spread. And we also need to remember here that when we talk about time deadlines, that actually climate change is not a single event. There's not going to be a date, January the 1st, 2030, or September the 1st, 2050, when we're all extinct. What we will see is an escalation of disasters, and precisely that escalation of disasters will, as it gets worse, create more and more the conditions for global revolution. The last 2 points I want to make, because I'm probably running out of time, is this: that our experience in Ireland, I don't know if other people, is that using the term eco-socialism opens a lot of doors for us. It was very well received on the recent demonstrations. So I think that, provided the context is appropriate, that to say we stand for eco-socialism cuts through a lot of the old arguments, and is a good way of preempting the idea that, you know, you're just the same as the Soviet Union or the old Soviet Union and its forced industrialization and so on. So that's one observation I would make from our experiences. And the other I want to talk about, just say, is about the question of the role of political parties, of socialist organization. But let me be clear about political parties, because there is still in the movement a tendency to say, we don't want political parties
1 minute left, John.
involved. Thanks, Bree. We don't want political parties, and we have to resist this. It's not true. The role of the political parties in this process is not just a question of you need a revolutionary party to lead a revolution. You do, but it's absolutely vital in the present situation, because precisely that, because a socialist political party is involved in many different struggles on many different fronts, it can be crucially important in building the kind of coalitions we need to fight for climate justice. I probably embarrass her, but I would just cite here the example of the role played by Breed Smith, my comrade here, in organising our recent climate justice demonstration in Dublin. Somebody right at the beginning of the coalition that Breed was putting together said, we don't want political parties, and particularly we don't think Breed should be the coordinator of this, because we want someone politically neutral. But in fact, Breed's experience as a revolutionary, yeah, I'm going to finish this, Breed, like it or not, was crucial in building links with people like small farmers, with the unions, with United Against Racism, and so on, for a broad and vibrant demonstration. So the point is, revolutionary socialist organization is crucial in this process, and we should be proud of it and defend it. Okay, thanks, Breed. I'll stop there.
Thanks, John. And as usual, you packed loads into that. Fair play. That was very interesting. I'll just remind everybody before I introduce the last speaker to put up your hands, please, using the electronic function, the little hand that goes at the bottom of your screen. You just press it to show if you want to speak, and then when Alex finishes, we'll open the discussion. So I'm going to introduce Alex Klinikos, the author of, among many other books, The Revolutionary Ideas of Karl Marx and Deciphering Capital. He's also the co-editor of the Routledge Handbook of Marxism and Post-Marxism, and writes a weekly column for Socialist Worker. So Alex, thank you, and you've 10 minutes.
Okay, thanks, Breed. I also want, before I move to the substance of what I'm going to say, to thank someone else as well, namely Martin Empson. It should be obvious to everyone from all the messages from in the chat that he's central to the organization of this conference, but he hasn't simply been doing an enormous amount of work for the conference. He also had the idea in the first place, and it's a really important contribution he's making with this, as he does both intellectually in his writings and in his political activism. That's the nice thing I'm going to say. Let me now move on to the nasty stuff. There's a book about the outbreak of the First World War called The Sleepwalkers. And what it really says, as the title indicates, is that the leaders of the different European states walked blindly into war. They didn't intend it or want it, but collectively, through their clashes and mistakes and so on, they produced this terrible disaster. Now, you can't say that about the leaders of the capitalist world who gathered in Glasgow for COP26. It's not that they don't know what they're doing. They've been warned again and again and again by the scientists about what will happen, the catastrophes that will take place if they don't drastically cut CO2 emissions, but they carry on nevertheless. And this, to me, is a very clear confirmation of Marx's understanding of capitalism. Marx sees capitalism as a system of competitive accumulation. Martin talked about this earlier, in which the rivalries between the different capitalists and their own greed drives them onwards, without them fully understanding and certainly controlling what's going on. Having said that we're confronted with this blind system of capital accumulation that is seeking to really drive us off the cliff, what I say doesn't absolve the leaders of the capitalist world. It's not a suicide pact. They're not saying we're all going down together. No. They want to shift the burden of climate disaster onto the backs of the poor and of future generations. For themselves, they want to use their wealth to, as far as possible, insulate themselves from what's happening. One of the things that happened during the pandemic that was very interesting was that sales of super yachts really shot up, because these emerged as safe places for the bosses where they and their families could escape the plague, escape COVID-19, and still, enjoy a luxury life, and at the same time, using the mass media, using the internet and so on and so forth, carry on with their business. Or look at Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk playing at space travel. In their heads, and sometimes it's more explicit, is the idea that one of these days they can blast off to exploit a new planet, waving goodbye to the rest of us, saying goodbye, suckers. So the developing catastrophe isn't uniting humankind. That's part of the nonsense of COP26. We're all in it together. It's dividing it, and it's dividing it along class lines. And it's very important not just to bewail that, but to see that in that class antagonism lies the solution. The only solution to the climate crisis is a class solution. It's socialist revolution that would overthrow capitalism. Now, of course, in this context, we then get the question about time limits that John raised. The planet's already burning. The catastrophe that scientists have been predicting for decades is here with us now. That's what the pandemic shows. That's what the wildfires that, for example, Aphrodite talked about, all the floods, the famines, the droughts going on in different parts of the world. We heard about the situation in the Sudan, for example. That's what they're saying. The catastrophe is here. And I think today there'll be a lot of people after COP26 who are simply despairing. They think the situation is hopeless. They would dismiss socialist revolution as something that, even if it happens, would come too late. And I think we have to give an emphatic no to people who say that, because what's needed to be done, it's not just the scientists have been warning what was going to happen. They've also been setting out very clearly what needs to be done. Ending any dependence on fossil fuels, massive comprehensive decarbonization of the economy, expansion of public transport, transfer of resources to the global south, which is in the firing line of climate catastrophe. All the things that we now know beyond any doubt capitalism won't do. That's the clear lesson of COP26. The only thing that can do this, can affect this transformation, is democratic planning, the basis of a genuinely socialist society, working people collectively and democratically managing the resources of society. This is the only way in which, the only framework in which we can begin to address what the great Marxist ecologist or ecological Marxist John Bellamy Foster calls the planetary emergency. but it's not just a question of having a vision of a democratically planned socialist economy. It's understanding that it will involve a shift in power. It will involve the expropriation of capital. That's the condition of avoiding complete catastrophe, of mitigating the catastrophe that has already begun. And that's why we talk about the working class. We're not sentimentalists or, you know, have some archaic interest in the Industrial Revolution. We talk about the working class because it's only the workers who have the power to expropriate capital and to introduce a democratically planned economy, because the system depends upon them for its profit. And the pandemic has proved this, because what we've seen in the pandemic is a shift to even greater demand for goods as opposed to services, particularly in the better off parts of societies, both in the north and in the south. And that's made the, you know, lying behind the disruptions to climate change and so on and so forth is crucially this increased demand for goods. These goods have to be transported, and the logistics, the workers in logistics, which includes people like Irma, wharfies, dock workers like her, but involve all sorts of different activities. They have become even more important than they were in the past. Where do Bezos's profits come from? They come from the people working in his warehouses, driving his vans. These workers are an example of the tremendous power that workers have. Were you telling me something, Breed? Or no?
1 minute. 1 minute left. Yeah.
1 minute left. Okay. Okay. Well, in all probability, a successful socialist revolution will inherit a damaged planet, a planet that has already been damaged by the developing catastrophe. That's nothing to bewail. Marx had a very profound and realistic understanding of the way in which human societies are embedded in nature. He always called nature a nature-imposed necessity. He talked about the realm of necessity that even a communist society would face. He didn't see communism as just everyone laying back, smoking joints and enjoying material abundance. It would depend on hard work, like every human society has had. And that's what will be needed when, as we intend, a socialist society inherits this planet that the capitalism is ravaging. But a socialist revolution is the necessary condition to repairing all the damage that's been done, as well as overcoming all the injustices inherent in class society and in capitalism in particular. So all is not lost. There's no reason to despair, but the reasons for getting rid of this society are much even clearer today than they were yesterday or the day before. And I'd appeal to people who agree with what we've been arguing here from all over the world, people in the IS tendency from all over the world, arguing for this socialist revolutionary solution to the climate crisis, the climate disaster, to join us in this tendency to transform the world and save the planet and ourselves. That's it.
Excellent, Alex. Thanks so much. And you're just 1 minute over. You did really well there. So thank you to all our three speakers for the initial contributions, and we will come back for questions to be answered and final points to be made at the end. Today, this session now ends today's conference, which has been organised by the IST, the Revolutionary Alternative to Capitalist Climate Disaster. And there is in the chat room there an opportunity for you to join the IST group in your country if you're not already a member. So please take note of that. And I too want to thank the organisers. It was a wonderful day and certainly a shot in the arm after the 2 weeks of COP, that the reiteration of the failure of our leaders to do anything at all to stop climate catastrophe. And we all have a job to do to build that movement that we talked about all day in our own place that we live, in our workplace, in the country we live in. And I think that today's discussion and the introductions by all the very, very good speakers will help us a lot in guiding us towards that. So I'm going to take the 3 speakers we've had back in the order that they appeared and give them a few minutes each to sum up and to answer any questions. So Michelle, are you ready to come in? And then I'll take John and then finally Alex. Thanks, Michelle.
Yes, thanks, Breed. And thanks, comrades, for a really interesting discussion. I just have a couple of things I wanted to mention. I've been thinking a lot. I was trying to think how the question of Striketober, I don't know if people have heard of this wave of strikes that has been happening across the US, across Canada, and undoubtedly in other parts of the world, but very interesting development and a sort of a rash of very strong rejections of proposed contract deals, the impact of COVID, how it has affected people, what they're willing to put up with, their sense that it is possible to organize things differently, that the bosses certainly will change gears when it's in their interest and so on. This is a very, I think it's just something that's very important for us to keep an eye on, because any one of those movements that can push through and build the confidence, it's golden for us. We know that confidence of the working class to fight for itself is vital in its ability to rise to this historic challenge that we face. And I think, as Lewis said, the importance of us building openly as revolutionaries, because there are no solutions on offer that can take us there, that can take us to where we need to be in challenging this system. I want to mention, in terms of what Kenny Thompson said, I really agree that what people are experiencing in some of the struggles on Indigenous lands, first of all, the courage and tenacity that they have demonstrated has been brought home to us over and over again in the past few years, with the full weight of the state coming down on them. So there are particular conditions there, but it's also, as we've discovered, not a spectator sport. There is an open call by Indigenous communities for settlers to show solidarity with them. And right now, that is a live question on the Wet'suwet'en territory in northern British Columbia, where the Coastal GasLink is preparing to drill under the river, a pristine river that literally you can drink out of, like it doesn't exist anywhere. And they are fighting for that. It is their land, it is unceded land, and the police are lining up to go in there and they want solidarity. So it's a real challenge. How can we actually, as people who aren't on that territory, have meaningful solidarity? And I think there are opportunities for us to do that. And that is very much what activists are thinking about here. In terms of what Charlotte said and the links not being automatic and the role of socialists, this is a vital task for us. And that we need that pressure from below. And finally, in terms of what Jason just said about the far right talking to coal workers in Australia, we have the same thing happening here. It's in the oil and gas sector, where far right groups and the right in general are trying to get a toehold in there, because there's real despair, because jobs are drying up. The oil and gas sectors are actually under pressure, and there's been a loss of jobs. And if we do the transition that we need to do, there will be more loss of jobs. The left has to be there. We know the reformist left is not there. We have not got the bold kind of visions being put forward that we need to equip ourselves with in our trade unions, on our campuses and so on. The far left, the revolutionary left, has to take up that task, and I'm thrilled that we've had such a great turnout today, and I hope that all of us can contribute to building that such an important force in the times ahead. Thanks, comrades.
And thank you very much, Michelle. It's been really, really interesting listening to you, and I only wish we had more time to hear what your description of what's happening there. It's really amazing and very, very challenging. I'd like to ask John Molyneux to come in now for a few minutes and try and address some of the questions and issues that were raised as well. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Brad, and thanks to all the speakers and the organisers of a brilliant conference. I just want to start by saying about our rulers. Even before COP, let's make no mistake about it, they were deeply, deeply guilty. They have known for 40 or 50 years what we're looking at, just like the scientists who work for ExxonMobil knew. And they have done nothing and tried to sweep the whole issue under the carpet. And now, even when the issue is staring them in the face, their commitment to capitalism overrides any commitment to saving the planet. What is their real perspective? My guess is their real perspective is to engage in greenwashing endlessly and actually gamble on there being a technological solution, a technological fix down the road so they don't have to do anything. And the truth is these people are willing to gamble the whole future of the human race to preserve their profits. So they ought already to be, held in the deepest obloquy before the court of history for what they've done already. It is going to be up to the world's peoples and the world's working class to show an alternative. Just some specific points. I thought it was really inspiring to hear the contributions from people like Caroline and Hugh and Michelle and so on about what has been happening in the movements and the role that revolutionary socialists have been able to play in the coalitions and the demonstrations. We need to be at the heart of these movements, and we need to be putting the case for socialist politics and for revolution in them. We also, I thought Charlotte was absolutely right to highlight, Charlotte from Glasgow was absolutely right to highlight some of the key demands that we need to put forward. We need to put forward demands that relate to working class people. Because many of the things that are needed to tackle climate change would also make life better for them. So demands like free public transport, we could reach all sorts of people with that demand, including bus workers, or free retrofitting of homes and so on. We need to make the links with all the different struggles. Here, I actually agree with John Bell, who said, does it mean we drop everything else? No, it doesn't. No, we don't drop everything else. I agree with him about that. Look, let's take the question of Sudan. Climate change is a massive issue in Sudan, but we don't say to the Sudanese people, forget your revolution, forget the struggle for democracy and justice in your country, just be climate change activists. No, we say that the struggle against climate change has to be a part of your revolution against dictatorship and the military. It was great to see, which we stand in solidarity with. So it was great to see people from Sudan here, but that principle, I think, applies. It applies to the Sudanese revolution, but it also applies to the campaign about homelessness down your road. You know, it applies at every level. And the last point I'll make simply is that I think that what Lewis Nielsen said is very important. That the demonstrations over COP mark a shift in the movement and a shift in our direction. And we have to be ready to take advantage of that, to seize that moment. This is a situation in which people are radicalizing, and it's part of a wider youth radicalization that's happening internationally as well, I think. So it's not something entirely separate, say, from the Great Rebellion over Black Lives Matter. These things are linked. And this is a major opportunity for revolutionary socialists to win people to our ideas. So we need to seize that moment. Thank you.
Thanks very much, John. At this point, I just want to thank all the speakers. It was a really, really good day, really interesting discussion, and a very important event. Just to also thank Martin Ensign and the organisers. Thanks for organising this, and I hope the movement grows out of it. And to all of you here for playing your part in building the climate movement. It's been really hugely important, as been stated and restated throughout the day, that the role of revolutionary socialists is at the heart of that movement. I'm going to ask Alex Klinikos to finish up, and when he's finished, we'll finish the meeting. So once again, thank you all. Good luck, and as James Connolly said, our demands most modest are, we only want the earth.
Excellent, yeah. Connolly always puts things in a brilliant way. I want to reply to, I just want to deal with or comment on some questions. First of all, Kofi's question, what about the social dialogue organized by the International Labour Organization? Kofi, the ILO has existed since 1919. It's become part of the institutions of the UN. It's been calling for social dialogue for decades. What's been happening in those decades? That the bosses worldwide, everywhere, north and south, have torn up whatever commitment to social dialogue they had in the past and have gone on the offensive against workers to make their conditions worse, systematically worse than they were before. And this process continues. It continued through the pandemic. So to be honest, I think social dialogue is a waste of time. I think we should put demands on the employers, but we should put demands on the state. But the way we're going to get those demands won is through organisation and collective action, not through dialogue. That's the first point. Secondly, Barbara asked about some of the things I was saying about communism. I'm very pleased about the question, Barbara, because it allows me, I didn't have time to read out this quote from Marx, which I think is brilliant. He says that communism obtains when the associated producers govern the human metabolism with nature in a rational way, bringing it under their collective control instead of being dominated by it as a blind process. I mean, that's exactly, you know, what's at stake in the struggle that we're in at the present time. Marx goes on to say, though, but this always remains a realm of necessity. So freedom consists, for Marx, freedom lies in carrying through a revolution which gives the associated producers, the people who produce the wealth, the ability to collectively control the planet. But human beings are still subject to all sorts of material constraints and pressures. This will be very true if, when a socialist revolution succeeds in the coming, we don't know when, years or decades, because of the damage that capitalism has done to the planet. What is the content of what a socialist revolution would start to do? Well, as I said, the framework is democratic planning, but it would involve initially taking all sorts of emergency measures to remedy the damage. Now, people have been critical of Andreas Malm, but one thing that I like in his recent writings is he stresses the necessity of coercion, of using the coercive power of the state, I think a workers' state, not the existing capitalist state, to seize resources from the capitalists, to compel the possessing classes to submit to a transformation of priorities. What that will involve is all sorts of things. There'll be choices about what industries to shut down, dirty industries to shut down straight away, but there are also some dirty industries that will need to be kept, parts of them that will need to kept going to produce the very quickly the kind of tools and machines that will need to make a much more comprehensive shift to a fully decarbonized economy. But I would say, even when it's necessary to retain some dirty industry in the transition, the general direction of such an emergency, if you like, emergency workers' government would be the direction we want to go anyway. John mentioned cheap, free public transport. That's an obvious way in what is desirable from the point of view of the planet and what is desirable from the point of view of working class people coincides perfectly. So there may be all sorts of harsh necessities an emergency workers' government confronts, but the direction will take us into the communist future. Last point, I also want to agree with John Bell about not dropping everything, because if we look at the struggles that are taking place today, yes, we've had a big step forward with the struggle around climate change, despite what the people at the top have been doing. I agree with what Lewis and others said, but there are other very important struggles. that are connected with the struggle around climate change. Critically, there's the question of racism. And here, of course, one connection is that very often the people who are being attacked are climate refugees. When we heard about the Sudan and Northeast Africa have been suffering the onset of climate change for decades now. And this underlies the political struggles and wars and disasters that have taken place there. Solidarity with the revolution, and we hope that it wins. This pushes people to become migrants, to whether they would prefer to be migrants or not. And then we get racists like Priti Patel going on the offensive against them. This doesn't just directly attack them. This divides the working class. And there is a continuity of struggle, because it's true, as people said, that the climate protests withered away to a large extent on a significant scale during the pandemic. But we had Black Lives Matter. We had these astonishing protests in the middle of a pandemic. Some people say the biggest protests in the history of the United States. Global solidarity, like we've heard at Bristol, and so on and so forth. Strengthening our arms, not simply in the struggle against racism itself, but more generally in the struggle against the system. And one of the key things that revolutionary socialists bring to each of these struggles is an understanding of their interconnection and how they can contribute to building a movement against the system itself. So if you like what you've heard today but aren't in the International Socialist Tendency, please join us. We need you, but we need collectively to fight to win the world away from the catastrophe that capitalism is inflicting.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex, and thanks everybody, and la lucha continua. See you all again soon.